wrap this up. Yeah.
When you say that as class became less of a mode of social schools within your society during the 60s and 70s,
Mm-hmm.
was there ever like similar to like what some people said in America, especially like New Zealand, Australia, of the idea of a classless society?
Mm-hmm.
Or that was just like, no, this is so unfair.
Well, I think that there have been various attempts, as I've tried to show, to think that Britain is moving to a type of classless society, or at least to understand the ways in which class is fundamentally reshaping. And that is a perfect key and perfect setup, I think, for the conclusion of this lecture, and for what I want to hear about you in terms of your take upon whether class is present or absent in the increasingly present or absent in the Ups series. The one thing I do want to say before we get to that discussion is that in a way, I would argue that the very finest achievement of social democracy, the social democratic system of the post-war years, was that the traditional male working class did effectively disappear. It is no longer possible in Britain to think of that traditional working class as having, in any sense, a presence in the way in which it had in the 1940s or even the 1950s. There's no doubt that people's standards of living and cultural expectations have changed, and that traditional working class is no more. The question is whether that means the class system as a whole has disappeared, or whether it's simply changed shape, changed voice, and changed look. And I do want to emphasise that social inequality in Britain remains very, very profound. In 2009, there was an official report called Fair Access to the Professions that came out that showed, for instance, that 7% of those, that 7% of the population educated at private schools that then cost about £30,000 a year, so $50,000 a year before tax. This tiny percentage of the population came to occupy 56% of lawyers, 70% of financial directors, and 75% of judges in British society. That even that though the average annual pre-tax income in Britain was £25,000, £25,000 is the average annual income, 80% of the population earn less than £35,000 a year, and 1% earn more than £100,000 a year. And, just as in the 1960s, 13.4 million people are living on low incomes, earning as much as 60% less than the 25,000 average annual income. So poverty and inequality remains a very central part of British society to this day. But, as you can see in the new study that has just come out, the BBC's Great British Class Survey, there is increasing uncertainty about what to make of the British class system. This new survey, conducted by sociologists at the University of Manchester, has now come up with 7 different categories of class. The elite, the established middle class, the technical middle class, newly affluent workers, emergent service workers, the traditional working class, and what they call the precariat. Okay? And the interesting thing about these 7 distinctions is not just that the tripartite structure of class is seen to be no longer very useful because there are too many categories in the middle. It is that class is defined not just in terms of wealth or the possession of goods, but in what they call social and cultural capital, access to forms of cultural and social activity that are key to forms of social mobility. So I'll give you one classic example that is associated with this study, okay, which you're all deeply familiar with: the rise of internships, of unpaid labour for university graduates to go and have a starter position in a company. These things are particularly prevalent, for instance, in the world of TV and broadcasting. Okay? It is only the people, the middle class, upper middle class people who come out of universities, who have parents who can afford to support them when they take unpaid labour, or who have connections with people in the business, who get to have access to the world of TV and broadcasting in Britain. So in many ways, that area is a really good example in which there still remains a type of intellectual aristocracy that social and cultural capital is very, very important for. Okay, so I want to end by not talking and by getting your sense of the 7-Up series, and whether you feel there is a sense in which class disappears in the making of that program. As you can see from this fabulous image, you can see the way in which all of the characters literally change over the years, from 7 down to 49, and we can either use these characters to talk about, or we can talk about any of the others. This is, of course, Tony, the East End cab driver. This is, what the hell is this, Bruce, the son of missionaries who's privately educated and ends up working as a teacher first in London and then at a private school. This is, oops, I've lost my, this is Jackie, who is one of the 3 working class daughters who all interview together. It's not Jackie, is it? What is it? It's Lynn, who becomes a librarian and has a couple of daughters. Who is this one? This is, of course, Neil, the Liverpudlian, one of the very few middle-class people in the sample, who goes to grammar school, lives in a squat in London in the 1970s, ends up as homeless, and then becomes an elected official standing for the Liberal Democrats, having never had a other form of paid employment. And this is Simon, who is the only person of colour in the entire series, a product of a mixed-race relationship. His mother is taken out of an orphanage, basically, because his single mother dies when he's young, and he goes through a couple of marriages and has a whole bunch of kids, and reflects upon the position of black, the changing position, or his changing relationship to blackness in British society. So you can take those figures, or you can take anyone else and say, well, does class become less present in their life? Who wants to start us off? We've got 10 minutes to talk about this, and I will keep you here for 10 minutes, so you might as well talk. Yeah, what's your name? Katie.
Well, I was interested in someone, I forget her name, she was one of the ones who was most like, I don't like doing this, I don't like talking to you about my
Right.
life.
I think this is Susie, whose parents separate when she's young. She goes through the chain smoking phase.
Yeah. And then at the end, I watched 49
Right, yeah.
where I was actually talking about wanting to go back to school
Mhm.
and go like get a better education,
Mhm.
so that she can
Mhm.
have conversations with anyone in the world that knows what she's talking
Right,
about.
right.
And I thought that was really interesting because she started from a working class background, and it feels like she never, I mean, she now has like opportunities that she wouldn't have had.
Oh, hang on, I think we're talking about the wrong person. Is she interviewed by herself, or is she part of the three girls that were interviewed together in the beginning?
I think I was basically.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, right. So, and you feel like she does have more, that she's disproved the point of the program, which is people remain locked in their class position?
No, I feel like she feels like that.
Right.
Because she was saying, like, I don't think that I turned out how you thought I was going to. I think that you
Right.
wanted to slot me in somewhere.
Right.
Really,
Right. And she's living in Scotland in a high rise and has bad arthritis. Do any of her children go to university? Right. They are. They're all. But in the next one, they're not, and they don't. Yeah. And they all sit. Those three posh boys all sit on the thing and say, yes. Well, when I finish here, I'm going to go to Cambridge, and then I'm going to go and they all do, and they all remarkably do. But there's only really two middle class people in the whole series. One is Neil, who is a grammar school kid from Liverpool, who has a year in university and then drops out, and the other is the person who is called Neil, who is the guy who comes from a farm in Yorkshire and ends up being an academic in the US. Rather scarily familiar to me, and he's also about the same age. Anybody else? So you're saying basically they're still locked in their class position? Yeah.
Well, I guess the three upper class kids that said when I got to them, he was also a working class money. He had the same ideas as the kid, not necessarily to the university.
Right.
Get a job, or that's and get a job.
Right.
And he does.
Right.
And I think that I don't see how that relates to speaking in class with how certain individuals have a plan on things.
Right.
Well, others just kind of have to work.
Right. But the argument of the program, whether you buy it or not, is that the vision that you have of your life is constrained by your class position. So Tony can only think, for him becoming a jockey is really like a real elevation. For him becoming a cabbie, a London cab driver, that's like a classic working class occupation in London in the post-war period. A service worker, because there ain't any jobs left. So the idea is that people's image of what is possible in their life comes from their position of birth. Anybody else want to say that this looked really different to them? The thing I'm really interested in here is that one of the key ways in which we think about class, particularly if you've grown up watching American TV and all of those dreadful masterpiece theatre versions of Britain, is that the thing that's really, really evident in the early films is that the elite groups talk terribly, terribly, terribly well, and the working class people talk like they really, come from the East End of London. That's a really bad Cockney accent. But by the end of the film, i.e., by the time they reach 59 or 49 or 56, are those accents as noticeable to you? Do people look and sound differently? I mean, obviously they do because they're 50 years older or 40 years older, but do the way in which they present themselves as a member of a certain class look different? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Eric, you were going to say? Yeah, Tony pretty much fits with his accent. But I think many of the middle class people, or the people of the elite, and I'm thinking of people like Susie, who's the woman whose parents die, and she her dog kills a rabbit in the garden when they're interviewing her, which I love. That's one of my favourite scenes. And who ends up marrying a lawyer and looking at being a stay-at-home mum, and ends up actually being a bereavement counsellor. And she is educated in the private school. She does ballet, she does horse riding, all the things that upper middle class women do. And yet by the end of the programme, she sounds really just pretty much like Jackie or Lynn or any of the working class people that come out of the East End. So there is a real flattening of those types of differences in terms of presentation. But it's really, I think, significant that the children of the working class kids in this series, none of their kids go on to university, not a single one of them. Whereas all of the ones from the higher social groups basically continue to have access to that world. That's a pretty fundamental and important important difference. The other thing I think is really, really interesting, and I'll pick up next week, is that there's a really interesting shift in the film in the way in which it ceases to be about the experience of class, the sort of social and economic experience of class, and becomes increasingly about a type of emotional literacy. So they talk, from 42 up onwards, they are much more having a conversation about feelings and about relationships with husbands or with parents in a completely different type of way. And bear in mind that those are the years when reality TV begins to also take bite. So I want you to think of this series as very much part of position between this debate about class and classlessness that begins in the 1950s and the 1960s, but also part of all of the cultural projects that I've been talking about, which try and represent class to people, to try and to show, well, look, this is class experience. This show is a really good illustration of both of those things. And if you haven't watched all of one of them, I really suggest that you do, because it's very powerful stuff and has been widely mimicked elsewhere in the world. Lots of other countries now have their own spin-off versions of the Up series. Okay, well, look, thank you for your patience. And next week, I think we head to the 60s and the 1970s, and then we're almost done. Like, the end of the semester beckons.